Before Tahir Khan Saab speaks on Afghanistan, um and that's very interesting to listen his perspective on Afghanistan, looking at the changing relations with Afghanistan. Nobody was expecting the relations will turn on to this direction. I would like to request Mr. Sheharyar Khan. Is the executive director of the National Democracy Forum in Islamabad. He's a development economist with extensive experience in research, governance, and development policy, and leads initiatives promoting inclusive governance and social cohesion. He will speak on how CVE, countering violent extremism, is a challenge for Pakistan in changing regional security architecture. So after that, Tahir Khan Saab on Afghanistan. So Mr. Sheharyar Khan Saab.
Ji, thank you so much, Dr. Kamar Chima, Ambassador Azaz Chaudhry, Sajid Tarar Saab. Thank you so much for the invitation and bringing forward a topic that is very important and historically hasn't gotten a lot of traction within the Pakistani security paradigm. So when we talk about counterterrorism, the key aspect, or I would say the flip side of the coin, would be countering violent extremism. And historically, Pakistan has done a lot when it comes to kinetic measures, countering terrorism, but when it comes to prevention of violent extremism or prevention of and implementation of non-kinetic measures to curb extremism and radicalization, Pakistan has always been a bit lacking. So the establishment of NACTA in the last 10 years and the results that were achieved. When it comes to the framework of NACTA, NACTA is the only organization in Pakistan that has the mandate of implementing and developing policy when it comes to prevention and countering violent extremism. It was basically established on the idea or the way the Department of Homeland Security operates in the US, which basically brings together all the security agencies in the US, does a lot of intelligence sharing, and coordinates between various law enforcement agencies. So this is what was envisioned when NACTA was formed, that it will be a body that will basically bring together all various intelligence agencies, and some sort of knowledge sharing mechanism will be developed and shared with the relevant departments, which was unfortunately turned out to be a non-starter. When the Joint Intelligence Directorate was established, a lot of intelligence agencies chose not to share any information within amongst themselves. The other mandate of NACTA was to implement and develop policy when it comes to curbing violent extremism and how the society can be taken forward and radicalization can be stopped. I've had the pleasure of working with NACTA for the last many years, and I've also been involved with the Ministry of Interior in developing the National Internal Security Policy 2018 and the National Counter-Extremism Policy Guidelines with NACTA. So I'll just share some of the learnings that I've had, which turn out to be challenges when it comes to implementing the CVE framework in Pakistan. So first and the foremost, Dr. Kamar Chima asked me a question that what are the key challenges when it comes to CVE in Pakistan? And to see or gauge the challenges, first of all, you need to see what the main narrative of any terrorist organization would be and the narrative they try to propagate in Pakistan. So if you look closely at the narrative or the propaganda machinery of TTP, historically we would basically assume that it would be a ideological organization, but you would also see that their narrative would be closely aligned to the narrative of deprivation, how provinces are deprived, how there's a very strong center, how the resources are not traveling to the right population, and how the federation basically holds on to the resources. When it comes to recruitment of the youth, radicalization, these types of narratives are now being used by terrorist organizations which historically have been very Islamist in nature. And even they are turning and using the governance lens in their favor to basically make their inroads into the local population. So that would, I believe, would be the first challenge when it comes to the implementation of the CVE policy or the CVE framework. Now, what exactly entails a countering violent extremism framework? I, for the sake of this conversation, would be looking at, or talking about de-radicalization or reintegration programs. And one of the very prominent examples that we have, and I don't want to be political, I don't want to see it from the political lens, because that basically limits our understanding of how CVE operates in Pakistan. I would look at the TTP example and the negotiations that the Pakistani state was indulging in during the time of the last military regime and the PTI regime at that time. So the news that basically emerged from those talks, something that I understood, one, that the local population was not taken into account or confidence when these talks first emerged. There was no protocol set when it comes to implementation of that de-radicalization program, which I see it as. It was basically a disengagement, reintegration, and a de-radicalization program done very inefficiently. So the first component that needed to be done was to take the local population or the local perspective in mind before even launching those sort of talks. We basically look at it from a very political point of view, that we were talking to some terrorist organization. But behind the whole framework was a de-radicalization, disengagement, and reintegration program that was being implemented, but not being implemented in letter and spirit or without any knowledge of how these programs work. So the local population was not taken into confidence. First, the perceptions of the local population were also not taken into account, that if these former terrorists or these former militants are reintegrated into the society, will the local population will accept them? What about the local grievances that were developed during the time when these operatives or these militants were extorting money from the local population, when they were involved in kidnapping, when they were involved in terrorist activities, especially the terrorist activity that basically took place in APS. So these are very grievous terrorist incidents, and the local population was not really on board or ready to accept these militants to be come back and re-establish themselves in the local population. So this whole reintegration program, and then when more information emerged, we also realized that these militants were not even ready to lay down their arms. Then these militants were not ready to accept the constitution of Pakistan. Even then, these militants were allowed to come back from Afghanistan, and initially they settled in the Swat areas, and the local population, there was a huge uprising, if you remember, and these people then left and basically settled in areas between Pakistan and Afghanistan, former FATA. So when it comes to a de-radicalization or of CVE policy, Pakistan lacks the direction, the expertise, or a framework that can be applied holistically to our border areas. And whenever a CVE policy is implemented, it has to take into account the conflict dynamics of that particular area. So the conflict dynamics of former FATA would be completely different from the conflict dynamics of Balochistan, or if you compare it with South Punjab, those dynamics will again be very different. When it comes to conducting operations, we also need to differentiate between terrorist organizations, and we also need to differentiate between insurgencies. And the policy or the frameworks used to counter both are very different. I still believe that the BLA issues an insurgency, and the TTP issues is basically a terrorist problem. Insurgency and terrorism, the biggest difference is that the insurgency always has local support, and terrorists are an organization. When we come out of militant organizations, the biggest threat to Pakistan or the social cohesion would be, in my opinion, the TLP issue. Because when it comes to terrorist organization, we know that there's a structure, there's militants, there's weapons involved. When it comes to TLP, it's very ideological, and the kind of extremism that they basically propagate has already seeped into the whole DNA of the society, which is a much bigger problem as compared to what we are facing on the border, which is more kinetic in nature. So what is Pakistan doing? What are the strengths? When it comes to the policy framework, historically, when it comes to any policy in Pakistan, the biggest challenge we basically see is the gap between development of policy and implementation of that policy. So right now, obviously I've talked about a few policies that are already in place. There's the National Internal Security Policy 2018. There was an National Internal Security Policy 2014, out of which the National Action Plan came out. And currently, under this government, there is a Apex Committee on the implementation of NAP 2.0 that is already operating at the Prime Minister level. So under that Apex Committee, there are four subcommittees that have been established. Subcommittee number 1 basically looks at counterterrorism. Subcommittee number 2 looks at hardening the state. Subcommittee 3 basically focuses on information, and Subcommittee 4 is looking at the socio-economic domain. So the last two, information and socio-economic domain, they come under the mandate of non-kinetic measures and countering violent extremism. The first two committees basically look at more counterterrorism and kinetic measures. So they are being implemented by the Interior Ministry, and the last two have been divided between the Information Ministry and the Ministry of Planning, Development and Reforms. So this is the latest framework that is there. When it comes to NACTA, again, it's an organization that is very close to me because I've worked historically very closely with various, I think like over 20 NCs up till now that have been changed in the last like 5 to 8 years. Now NACTA is mainly operating under the framework of NIFTEC, which is the National Intelligence Fusion and Threat Assessment Center, and their main mandate would be to gather information. This is exactly what the Joint Intelligence Directorate was supposed to do, and now it will be done under the mandate of NIFTEC, which will be headed by or led by the military. And from the way I see it, NACTA would have overall role, but most of the implementation will be done under a NIFTEC. My question would then arise that will there be an organization in Pakistan that will be mandated with implementation of CVE programs, implementation of countering violent extremism, or de-radicalization programs? How will that exactly be done? So under the whole framework of the Apex committees, four centers of excellence on countering violent extremism have been established, one in each province. And we have some learnings from the KP Center of Excellence on Countering Violent Extremism, and it has indulged in research studies and some programming on ground, but it hasn't really given a lot of like results up till now. So I really hope the rest of the provinces will probably be working much more efficiently under the whole umbrella of the CVE framework. Now, when it comes to CVE programs, even with NACTA, the biggest issue has been always insufficient funding, that whenever a department or a specialist agency develops a policy, they lack the teeth or the mandate to implement that policy if they're not given the concerned amount of funds that are required. So NACTA has never formally received any funding to implement any programs. Other than that, even Pakistan outside NACTA, and when it comes to the whole security architecture of Pakistan, it lacks experts or skilled professionals who specialize in CVE programming. Even right now, most of the CVE or the previous programs that we have observed have been very military dominated. Key example being the Sabaun Center in Swat, which has indulged or done some programming in de-radicalization. De-radicalization also is very important because if you get to capture any terrorists or young militants, it is very dangerous, I would say, to put them with the regular criminals in jails, because that leads to more radicalization and leads to more further recruitment. So I think like their whole framework on how to deal with them, Pakistan is lacking. We do develop CVE policies, but we don't really have a framework on how to deal with de-radicalization when Pakistan faces a very major counterterrorism threat, which is becoming much worse with the each coming day. So when it comes to the lens with which we basically view CVE, it has historically been very military centric, and CVE generally in theory is always a socio-economic problem, and it's a whole of a society approach that is required, and it has to be in nature non-kinetic, and it has to be embedded into the community in which it is operating. So that is something that still lacks. Over-reliance on military approaches basically is counterintuitive when it comes to prevention of extremism. So I would basically urge the policymakers in Pakistan, especially when they're indulging in counter-terrorism efforts, especially in former FATA, if you look at KP, if you look at Balochistan, that first there should be policy making that is rooted in evidence and to deeply understand and let go of institutional egos to understand what the current drivers of extremism are. They are very different in Balochistan, they are very different in FATA, they are very different in KP, they are extremely different in South Punjab. So the policy that is developed should be geographically centered. The de-radicalization programs and the protocols that need to be developed should not be imported from the Saudi model, which is very different, not from the Indonesian model, again, very different. It should be developed indigenously to understand how de-radicalization can be done, and a reintegration program, which is obviously essential if there are some militants that are ready to put down their arms and rejoin the society. Pakistan lacks the policy on how to basically deal with them and how to integrate them. So this basically gives the militant organizations a pipeline to recruit more people and integrate them into their ranks. One of the biggest areas where Pakistan again is lacking is youth engagement when it comes to the whole issue of terrorism. We don't realize that universities, which should be a guiding light for the students and an area where they can express their views, they can develop their worldviews, become a place of recruitment. And we've seen that when it comes to the whole issue of BLA in various campuses. And most of these campuses are based in Punjab, not in KP or not in Balochistan. So a lot of recruitment is being done. So how to basically engage them? And then again, there is a very thin line when it comes to implementing policies such as hardening the state and giving voice to the youth to express themselves in a constructive manner. So if we basically use a very hardened policy when it comes to youth engagement, that also goes very counterproductive, and it basically curtails creativity and the voice of the young people. So youth engagement and obviously recruitment and radicalization is very deeply rooted in socio-economic problems, poverty, when it comes to illiteracy, inequality. So that is the lens through which countering violent extremism should be viewed rather than a military lens. So even internationally, if you look at literature, if you look at international programs, most of the programs are rooted with a governance lens in which rule of law should be strengthened, and the young people should be given ample opportunities to basically constructively contribute to the local economy. Climate change, again, is a threat multiplier. Every time we have floods, every time we have glacial problems, every time there's an earthquake, there's like a lot of economic inequality that has risen, and these terrorist organizations find that as a very a breeding ground for recruitment into various terrorist organizations. So these are some of the points and observations that I've had. This topic.
जी आप कह रहे थे कि उनको रीइंटीग्रेट करें, गवर्नमेंट का पॉलिसी फेल हो जाती है गवर्नमेंट किसी कैसे करें रीइंटीग्रेट, बिकॉज़ it's a critical issue.
Sir, this obviously needs to be a whole of a society approach, but first the government needs to realize or decide whether there will be any reintegration or disengagement or not. Right now, the policy that remains is that there will be no discussions, no talks. But when we've seen the government's engagement with BLA, we've also seen the government's engagement with TTP. There is a policy in which the government basically says that if you put down your arms and if you're ready to come under the framework of the Constitution of Pakistan, we will encourage that. So that policy is not written, it's not a document, it's basically based on whims and the way the establishment or the security paradigm at that time will be operating. So this lacks a clear vision, and then obviously if a policy has to be made, it should be holistic, it should be inclusive. So will that policy be made inside closed doors, or will the local population or the affected population be taken into account? Because first of all, if they have to be reintegrated, the society has to accept them first. It won't be you and I that will be accepting them in F7. Maybe they will be reintegrated in Quorum agency. So are the people of quorum agencies or the local tribes taken into confidence when these guys are being reintegrated? Is there an intelligence mechanism that views their behavior after they have integrated? Have they actually laid down their arms, or what policies are there that the state has applied to these integration programs? So that is what I'm saying, that overall holistic approach has been missing. And this is a very important aspect when it comes to implementation of any counterterrorism efforts, or if we are like giving them a way out. So is that way out like visible or not?
Since this is a very important topic, if you allow me, I ask him one more question.
Sir.
TTP is a real issue now, and you said that part of their motivation is ideological, and then they build on the deprivation factor. Is there a territorial dimension to their objective to establish some kind of, rule or Sharia rule in the specified tribal areas, and whether there is any ownership within the people of that area for the kind of goal that these people have?
So they definitely have a territorial agenda. They've been very vocal about cancelling the merger with FATA that the Pakistani state has basically implemented. And they do want a territory. And unfortunately, the issue with TTP, the international community views it as a Pakistan problem. I basically view it as a global problem, because I also have been, I believe, and a lot of analysts in Pakistan, and like a lot of them sitting in this room, have continuously written that TTA and TTP are two sides of the same coin. And this understanding has been there for the last 10 to 15 years, ever since I've been working in this field.
And the local people are ready to buy that?
So the local people have already been through military operations. They have been at the receiving end from both, unfortunately, the state and the terrorist organizations. The terrorist organizations, in time of relative peace, have been indulging in extortion, kidnapping. The people over there have been giving taxes to TTP. They have been raising funds from that area. At that time, the state was missing. When the state decides to basically indulge in negotiations, they don't take the local population into confidence. When it comes to the people over there, when they are told that there will be another military operation, they haven't been compensated for the last military operation. And when they become internally displaced and their businesses are destroyed, their economy is destroyed due to heavy artillery shelling in response to military operations. So it's not an easy solution for this. But any solution should be rooted in the local population being taken into confidence. Even right now, a lot of local jirgas have basically taken the ownership, and they have kicked out a lot of TTP militants. And we are getting a new example from Lucky Marwat, in which their local jirga has basically asked the TTP to leave their areas. So this is an example that can be used, but a top-down approach without taking the people into confidence has always been a big issue.
Thank you.